Hello, this is Mr. Ellis. I'm going to create a video that will discuss the looping aspects or statements that are found in JavaScript. There are actually 3 looping statements in JavaScript, but we're only going to explore 2. The for loop and the while loop. Okay. As always, you'll see my HTML uses a style area to do my styling. I have p tags that are styled all the same. I have one section that is styled. My header has been styled as before, black background with blue letters, and then my body has all blue background. Okay. The actual display in the document is in section 1. I start by presenting the user with a menu, 1 through 4, that allows them to make a selection. If they select 1, then it will total sales for the company. If they select 2, then it will find the average sale for the company. If they select 3, then they will find the max and the min of the sales that occurred that day. After the user makes a selection, which he places in a text box that is at the bottom of the menu, I perform some operations. I perform the operations. I present him with the selection area so that I can capture his selection in the document instead of using the prompt. I now am using HTML to capture input. Each of these will be displayed in a p tag inner HTML 5 or 6. Okay. Now we're going to look at the code, the JavaScript code. The sales array is made up of sales. Okay. I think I have 10 of them to be simple. This sales array will be passed to all of our methods or functions. Okay. The start here is not needed, so I'm going to comment that out. Okay. The first function is do this. Do this is called when the button is clicked. Here on my button, you note that I always use this do this. It passes the sales array into this function. And so, with the sales array in hand, we go in. Now, I've offloaded the string document.getElement by ID for my text field, and I've placed it in selection or select, S-E-L. I've also taken the value from that field and placed it in a variable instead of using this dot notation everywhere. Now I'll use this variable, cell val. Okay. To determine which function or which selection was made, or which function to call, I will check that with a if statement. This if statement is a case structure. We have else if, else. Okay. So the if, the first one, says, hey, if the selection that was made is number 1, perform find the sum. Find the sum is past an array of values, which is our sales. If cell value is 2, it calls find the average. The average is past an array of values, the sales. The selection is 3, then we want to find the max and min, and again we're passing the array into this function so that we can find the maximum sale and the minimum sale. If it's not 1, 2, or 3, then we put an error message out, incorrect selection, try again. Now you'll note that this will be ongoing, because each time I click the button, it takes what's in the text field and performs this method. function. All right, let's explore these functions. As you can see, I'm going to demonstrate the same functionality with the while loop, so pay no attention to the comments. We'll come back to those. Okay. But my for loop, the for loop has 3 sections in its signature. Okay. The for loop says, perform this loop until this condition, or while this condition is true. When it becomes false, then you fall out and perform the next sequential statement. Okay. So here are the sections of the for loop signature. The initialization of the loop variable. When you're working with arrays, it's a good idea to start at the beginning. So I start with the loop variable at 0. The condition is the second section. The condition says, while the loop variable is less than the length of the array, perform this loop. Now, the length of the array is actually 10. The subscript of the array is 0 to 9, which is 10 elements. But in order to stay in bounds, I have to say less than. If you use this dot length, you must say less than. You cannot say less than equal to. Now the third part of the signature of a for loop is incrementation. It increments my loop variable by 1. X++ says increment X plus 1 and place it back in X. Now the body here is relatively simple. All you're doing is you're adding up each member of the array in an accumulator. This is known as an accumulator. Sum plus equal the number. It just keeps adding it into the same variable. At the end of the loop it comes out. I use that variable to print. Note, I have 2 fixed. Now, in the old days, we used to say multiply it by 100 and divide it by 100, and that would fix it at 2 decimal digits. Now we have a method, a built-in method in JavaScript that does that for us, and it's known as toFixed. And you can see I put in there I want 2 decimal digits. Okay. The rest of these are pretty much the same, except for they perform different functions. Okay. A find average will find the average. I start with the sum 0, and I start with the average of 0. I go in and I accumulate again. On the outside of the loop, I find the average by taking that sum and dividing it by the length of the array. Okay, the length of the array. Remember, it's now 10. So when you find the average of something, you take how many it is, you take the sum, and you divide it by how many elements you have. All right. And then again, in number 5, I use that to output the average. Last but not least is an algorithm for find the minimum. Okay. This particular function takes the array also. It says, hey, the maximum in the array is the first element, which is not true. The minimum in the array is the first element, which is not true. But because I want to bubble through that array, I start at the first one, and then I'm going to compare the first to the first. They're equal, so nothing happens. But when I compare the second to the first element, then I can make these comparisons and move values. Okay. Again, the signature is the same as above. I'm going to first say if that first element is less than the minimum. The minimum is the first element, so it's not less than. I'm not going to do anything. I go to the next if statement. Notice I didn't say else if. I just have 2 if statements inside my loop. One for the min and one for the max. I go to the next if statement and I say if that first element is greater than the max, which is not, I will shift the max now becomes that first element. And the same up here. If it's less than, then the min becomes that first element. But now that I'm through the first element and I go on to the second element with my plus plus, I'm now comparing the second element to the first element. And this becomes a significant swap right here if they meet the conditions. If they don't meet the condition, then we just move on and max stays the same or min stays the same, whichever we're looking at. Okay. At the end of this, I take and output the minimum and I output the maximum. All right. Having said all that, and that was a mouthful, let us go and look at this in action. Okay, as always, you see I have a very simple output. I'm going to present the user with a menu, and he will make selections, and I will go through each of these in turn without reloading, and you'll see that they work just the same. All right, so I'm going to start with the sum. I select 1, and it goes through and totals the amount. My total sales were $224.61. Now I'm going to change this to 2, and I'm going to go through and find out the average. The average sale was $22.46. And then finally, I'm going to check to see the maximum and the minimum amount in my array. The minimum sale was $2.99 and the maximum sale was $50. This has been Mr. Ellis demonstrating, no, I'm not quite finished, am I? In the interest of saving time, I'm going to simply go over the changes that must be made to turn this for loop into a while loop. While loop is just what it says. While this condition is true, x is less than the length of the array, I'm going to perform the body of the while loop, which is the same body for my for loop. Okay, so I won't bother to discuss that. What I will say is it's different. You have to prime a while loop, because if you don't, it'll never execute. So I prime it by making sure that the condition variable is within the range that makes this execute. So 0 is normally the range that we use when we're dealing with arrays. So I put 0 in, okay, and so now 0 is less than the length of the array, and it's going to perform the sum operation. Notice inside I have one more statement, an additional statement that increments inside the loop the value or the loop variable. Okay, and so when it reaches 10 in this case, then it will stop looping. Same goes for all the rest of these statements. I use a variable, I increment the variable, but I perform the same actions inside the loop. Okay. Now, outside the loop here, I find the average, so there's nothing changed inside except for the increment of my loop variable. Same here. I have initialization. The condition is met. It loops and increments the value inside the loop. Inside, remember, it's got to be inside of the while loop. And then when that condition is turned off, when it reaches 10, it's no longer true. It falls to the next sequential statement, which is my output into the p tag 5. And I'm going to demonstrate this for you. Here we go. It's the same actual operation. I'm gonna choose 3, and it worked. Here's the max. Here's the min. Let's choose 1. It worked. $224.61. This has been Mr. Ellis. Demonstrating looping in JavaScript. We have two loops, the for loop and the while loop.